Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm excited to talk with you today about Read Naturally Encore II. We'll cover an overview of the program and the steps that students go through. Read Naturally Encore is the paper-based version of Read Naturally. It has been around, of course, since the beginning. It started with Blackline Masters and audio cassettes. And then the current format of the paper and audio support version is Blackline Masters that come along with audio CDs. And so today we're going to be talking about our paper-based version, Read Naturally Encore II. To start, we'll talk about what fluency is. I suspect you all know, but we're going to just use some common terms to be sure that we understand we're all on the same page when it comes to that definition. I'll briefly talk about who typically uses this reading intervention, and then we'll talk about the strategy, meaning the different strategies that are employed during the program to maximize the achievements of our struggling readers. Then we'll talk about teacher responsibilities. After that, we'll get into the student steps. As was mentioned originally, there is a handout. The handout is not required for the first part of the training. However, you will need to access it for about the last 15 minutes or so. There's actually an interactive activity that we do at the end. And so the first 20 pages of the handout are slides. There's screenshots of the slides that I will show you. You can certainly have it open or print it out so that it's accessible, but it is not absolutely required to participate. However, the last 15 minutes or so is an interactive activity where it isn't essential that you have that handout. And the part where you are required to look for that handout is page 21. And I will mention that again when we get to that part of the training. But let's go ahead and begin with talking about what fluency is. Fluency is one of the 5 components to teaching reading. We know that their phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension are all of the components that are important and required for teaching reading. If you would for a moment, picture a student that you have who struggles with reading, and just turn on that audio portion of your brain and listen to the student read for a moment. Think of some words that you might use to describe a disfluent reader. Some of the words you may be thinking of are, it's hard, they read word by word, they make a lot of mistakes, they ignore punctuation. The first word I always think of is painful. It's incredibly, incredibly painful to listen to. Imagine how painful it is to have to read that way. Many of us, including myself, has a physical reaction to listening to a struggling reader, right? We know there's trouble within as little as 10 or 15 seconds. My stomach gets upset, and I know in a very short amount of time that we've got a problem. So we know exactly what it sounds like when there's an issue, and we also know what it sounds like when there isn't. We also know what fluent reading is. It's the ability to read the way that you speak. It's the ability to read with a very high level of accuracy, at an appropriate rate in which you speak, and with some expression. So the pace has to be connected with the pace in which you typically speak. Accuracy is very high, so you're reading the words correctly, and you have some expression. All of these components are essential to fluent reading, and all of these components are checked for when students are working in Read Naturally Encore. We are not about speed reading or fast reading. We are about reading well with a high level of accuracy, expression at an appropriate rate. And the reason that we care about that so much is not just that it's easier to listen to and more enjoyable to read, but it's that we know that it is incredibly highly correlated with comprehension. We've known this for decades now. This is a study that was done on a group of special education students, and you can see that oral reading fluency correlates most highly with reading comprehension. If you look at the left side of the table, it lists the different measures, and the right side of the table lists the validity coefficient. Statisticians tell us that a validity coefficient of 0.6 or higher means it's highly correlated. So all of these measures are highly correlated with how these students performed on a standardized comprehension test. I sure hope they are, because that's how we measure comprehension by and large, right? If you look at the bottom item on this table, in the measure column, you'll see the oral reading fluency row, and you'll notice that it has the highest correlation between how students performed on standardized comprehension tests. And I want to demonstrate something for you now. So what we're going to do is a little interactive activity. Now, I can't hear all of you, but I'm going to ask that you read the words on this screen out loud. I'm going to have you do just the first line and the second line. So I'm going to want you to read the first and the second line out loud as accurately and rapidly as you can. Okay. And although I can't hear you, make the most out of your investment in the time today and do read these words out loud. When your students work in Read Naturally Encore, they will always read out loud. We don't know what they're doing if they are not reading out loud. And fluency work is always done orally. So let's go ahead and read the first and second line of these on this slide out loud as accurately as you can. Here we go. Blue, red, orange, purple, white, black, green, blue, yellow, black, red. Now what we're going to do is not read the words as it's written, but instead we're going to name the color. And again, I'm going to do it out loud as accurately and as rapidly as I can. I'm just going to name the colors in the first line and the second line. All right, so please do that along with me out loud. Just name the color. Here we go. Red, gray, purple, yellow, orange, white, purple, white, green, red, gray. So which is easier? It's way, way easier to read it for us. And that is a remarkable thing if you really think about it, because naming colors is a much simpler task than reading. In fact, a 3-year-old would be better at this than all of us, because the 3-year-old knows her colors, but she hasn't started to learn to read yet. So to her, she just sees color. But you see the words immediately. It's why graffiti bothers us. If there's something nasty drawn or written on your way to work in the morning, as soon as you see those words, you know what they say. You don't have a choice. When your eyes fall on it, you know what it says. And because you are so automatic with reading, your entire brain is available to think about what the words mean rather than what the words say. Dr. Samuels was a professor in the University of Minnesota back in the 70s, and he put forth a theory called the automaticity theory, right? And it's really just dealing with the fact that reading is multitasking. And if we want our students to be able to be good understanders of the content that they read, they first need to be able to read those words without thinking. They need to be automatic with reading those words. So the students who tend to be students who utilize this intervention are students who are below the 50th percentile on an oral reading fluency norms table. Many of you may use a Dibbles or an Ames Web or some sort of a fluency benchmark assessment tool. And each district is a little different with when they're able to provide services. So you'll have to go with whatever your district recommendation is. But at Read Naturally, we say that students who are 10 or more words below the 50th percentile on the first time they read grade level material are good candidates for this intervention. You'll notice as you look at these numbers and any number on an oral reading fluency table, and you'll see that they always get better. As students go from the fall to the winter to the spring, the number goes up, whether they're in the 10th percentile or the 90th percentile, whether they're in 2nd grade or 8th grade. Everybody gets better throughout the school year. And that's a big relief for those of us who work with struggling readers. But it also is kind of scary for those of us who work with struggling readers, because even though our kids make progress, their peers make progress too. And they're never going to catch up unless they make more progress than their peers. Let's take this example of 3rd graders who come in at the 75th percentile in the fall, reading about 104 words. Struggling readers come in at about 59 words at the 25th percentile, so 59 or below. Take a look at the 25th percentile in the spring of the year compared to the 75th percentile in the fall. Now, this is just the middle of the bell curve. This is just 25th to 75th. We know that there's half of our kids are on either end of those, right? But our 25th percentile kids are not even where their peers were at the start of the year. And so we know what we need for our students to do. We need them to get in the act of reading so they can make the progress they need. It's also important always to remember that there is a natural cap to the pace in which students read out loud. Remember how we said we read as we speak? We don't want to push students beyond a natural pace. Adult proficient readers read somewhere between 150 and 200 words correct per minute when they read out loud. So here you'll see I've got a little box around this 146 words. Notice in 5th and 6th grade, they're about the same. If we go into a more expanded table of oral reading fluency norms, you'll see that this table, it's very, very similar to the other one, but you can see that they kind of max out. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in the 50th percentile and above are between about 150 and 200 words correct per minute. We don't want to push students beyond that. There's lots of things to learn, lots of things to work on, and once they can read at that pace, it's good enough. So let's talk about the strategy that can be used in order to help these students. We know that students become fluent by reading. We also know that setting aside independent reading time is not enough to catch our struggling readers up. The National Panel of Reading got together several years ago and made this statement, which I sort of laugh about because any educator can tell you that. What do our struggling readers do during independent reading time? Well, the first face I always imagine is the one that causes issues in the classroom because he's always the most memorable, but he's actually not what most struggling readers do. What most struggling readers do is they pretend to read, right? That's where they learn to hide their illiteracy. It's right in our classrooms during independent reading time. They grab a book that's similar to what their friends are reading and they just sit there and pretend. But I know that you are educators who are willing to take whatever moment you had to yourself in this day and spend it here learning about something that might help some of your kids. So I know you're the kind of people to go the extra mile to make sure that you are able to get your students to read during independent reading time. Let's take that scenario. You spend all weekend picking out a book for every single kid that is exactly at the topic that student likes. It's right at the level that student likes. And you spent $100 at Target and you've got candy bars hanging from the ceiling and you are able to get every single one of those kids to read during independent reading time. We've all done it. It's hard work, but we can make it happen. But even in that scenario, it is not equal practice because the proficient reader reads many more words than the struggling reader. In this example, a proficient reader, when he's reading silently, he probably reads at least 200 words a minute in his head. A struggling reader maybe only reads 50 words in a minute. So this is a disparity of 7,500 words in just one school week, if this is the only time these two kids practice, and we know the difference there. I always get the chills when I present this slide because it's a huge thing that we're up against. If even equal practice time is not equal practice, what can we do to get them to catch up? Because remember, they can't just make progress, they have to make more progress than their peers. And this program was designed to create an environment in which that's possible. The first strategy is teacher modeling. Students will read along with the audio CD. Remember, Read Naturally Encore is our paper-based version with audio CDs. So students will read along with the audio on the audio CDs. The story is read 3 times, and it's read slow enough that they can actively read along out loud with the audio support. It's not a listening activity. It's not a silent read. It's a read out loud with your mouths. Every time they hear a word and see a word and say the word at the same time, they are learning new words and they're solidifying high frequency words. So that teacher modeling that students do with that audio support teaches them new words, solidifies high frequency words, and helps them with accuracy and expression. The next strategy in the Read Naturally strategy is repeated reading. And that, of course, is the best way to get better at anything, is to do it over and over again. And so in the Read Naturally Encore, your students are going to have a paper-based passage, and they're going to read it many times. They're going to practice reading it over and over and over again. And that repetition allows them to become automatic with those words. It brings them to such a high level of automaticity that when they see those words in a different place, they can still read them. Okay, we don't just want our kids to be better at reading a passage if they read it 5 times. Of course they're going to be. What we want is our students to be better at reading a passage the next day, right? Tomorrow they're able to read it better, a new passage. We want it to transfer to new text. And so that high level of repetition is what allows that to happen. And the progress monitoring is what students do as they work through the program. Every time they practice reading, they're timing themselves. They get a score, a words correct per minute score. It goes higher. They get further. They sound more and more like their teacher does when she reads, and it's incredibly rewarding. That's the hook. You get a kid to see that he can get better in just 1 minute's time. And he starts to believe that he can actually get better at reading. And once you've hooked that kid, you know as well as I do, your job is half done. And that progress monitoring is what does that. And these three strategies together make the Read Naturally strategy. And that is what is used in Read Naturally Encore in our paper-based version. It's also used in our online program. We do have Read Naturally Live within our online suite of programs called Read Live. And these strategies are used in all of the programs that our company produces. So the teacher responsibilities for Encore, of course, include planning and setting up, placing students, implementing the steps, and monitoring student performance. Okay, so let's talk briefly about planning and setting up. The most important thing for you to remember when you're planning and setting up is that this program works because it increases the number of words a student reads. You want to always be thinking like an efficiency expert. Any wasted minute is an extra 100 words that they have not been able to read, right? So every minute, think of it as equating to time directly spent in the act of reading. This program gets kids in the act of reading a ton. So the more time you're able to dedicate to it, the more progress they're going to make. There is a direct correlation between the number of words the student reads and how much progress they make. And this program does a really good job at that. So when you go to implement something like this, you need to always be thinking, is this setup going to increase the amount of time they spend reading? Is the way I have it organized going to increase their time on task, their time in reading? Is it going to increase the number of words they read? Okay. You can't always answer the question in the way you want to, but it always needs to be asked and very heavily weighed as a priority for your students. Read Naturally Encore tends to be used in a resource room, a reading lab, a classroom, extended day, before school, after school, all those scenarios. Ideally, you have one teacher or para to every 6 or fewer students. Ideally, you will use it at least 30 minutes a session for at least 3 to 5 days a week. Remember, the more time you spend on it, the more words are read. The more words that are read, the more progress they will make. So if you can have 45 minutes, 5 days a week, great. But I know that we don't always control our schedules. And so you're going to give it as often as you can. And again, our minimum is 3 days a week, 30 minutes a session. So the materials you have, what you get, are blackline masters of the stories. If you look in the picture on the left, you're going to see that the student has a folder in front of her. On the right side of the folder, she has her hand pressed on the page, and that is a story that she's working on at that moment. The left side of the folder has other resources that she's going to need. She's going to need a pencil. She's going to need something to graph her cold and hot timing, so a red and a blue pencil, a reading guide if she needs one, and their graphs. So all those materials come with the materials when you purchase them, and you run copies for each student. When you're you do not get the folder with the material. So if you were to purchase these materials, what you get is a Blackline Master book with all the stories. You get Blackline Masters of the graphs for recording their fluency scores and their comprehension scores. And you also get a copy of a glossary for each level. Folders, we do sell them, but you can purchase them anywhere. And we do always offer a trial. So if you haven't used this program in the past and you want to try it, call our office. We're happy to send you a level to try with your students. We also have a trial of the online program if you prefer something online. But since we're talking about the paper-based version today, we certainly offer that as a trial as well. We'll mail it to you. If you don't like it, you just mail it back. If you do, you can keep it and we'll charge you, or you can mail it back and say, I like it, but I need another level, and we'll send you whatever you need. Okay, so we're real flexible about that. So here is on the left side, you'll see the Blackline Master picture of the graph. So you can see on the left side of this page, we have blue going for the cold timing, the first time they read a story. The red is on top. There's a place for them to record how they do on their comprehension and how they do on their retell. If you look at their comprehension score, you're going to notice or their comprehension graph, you're going to notice that every question is ordered in the same way. So the first question is always main idea, then detail, vocabulary, and so forth. So I can see very quickly on this report over here in kind of the upper right, the main idea question she's not doing very well on main idea. She's getting it wrong more than half the time. I don't have to take out a calculator and do any math or anything. I can just see that more than half of these boxes are not filled in. So I know she struggles with main idea. So this comprehension graphing helps you diagnose a specific kind of problem. And with retelling, the student just graphs how many words they wrote in their retell. But if writing a retell isn't the best use of your student's time, you don't have to have them do that. You can certainly have them skip that part. The audio CD that comes with the levels that you purchase, each CD contains 2 passages. So the first CD in the set is passage number 1 and number 2. The next CD is 3 and 4 and so forth. So there's 24 stories in each level, which means there's 12 CDs because each CD contains 2 stories. When you're preparing your materials for students, you're going to be running copies of the passages. We recommend you split them into 2 sets of 12. So you're going to give students the set of odd stories first and then a set of even stories later if they still need to work in that level. But that means that students won't ever have more than 12 stories to choose from at a time. It also means that all the CDs will be in circulation because each CD has 1 odd story on it and 1 even story on it. And so if you give the students all the odd stories, it means all 12 of the CDs can be in circulation at the same time. Here are the curricula options that are available. Now, when you purchase Encore, you purchase it by the level. So you choose whichever level or levels are appropriate for the students you're working with. Many people purchase both the sequenced and the phonics series. Some also get the idioms. Some mix and match. It's totally up to what the needs of your students are. And if you're not sure what to do, please call our office, our customer service people. I'm more than happy to talk you through, what your situation is and what may be the best for you. But to just give you a little of information about what I mean by these different series, as you can see, the sequence series starts in 1.0, that's early first, and it goes through 8.0, which is 8th grade reading level. The sequence series has the keywords with definitions. There's a numbered passage, and at the end, there's a retell. In the phonics series, the keywords do not have definitions. Instead, there's an audio phonics lesson on the audio CD. So instead of getting a lesson about vocabulary for keywords, when they're working in the phonics series, they get a phonics lesson. Then at the end, they practice reading words in a word list that all are dedicated to that phonics sound or pattern. And then they practice spelling words in that word list. So they do a phonics lesson at the beginning. Many of the words in the passage have that phonics pattern. There's a word list after they answer their quiz questions. They practice reading words in a word family and practice spelling words in a word family. And the idioms, the primary difference there is that the keyword isn't just one word, it's a phrase, it's an idiom. And the stories talk about the different meanings of idioms and how they kind of correlate with one another. So once you've decided you've gotten the materials you need, you've made your folders for your students, then you need to place them. And our placement process is available in our placement packet. When you purchase materials, you get a placement packet with your materials. You can also access it online, our website, readnaturally.com. If you go into the search function and type in placement packet, you'll be brought to a PDF of the placement packet. And it provides you with instructions. This is a very abbreviated list of those instructions. And this short, nice, succinct list is in that placement packet. And so is a much more elaborate, elongated description of how to do it. But basically, all you do is estimate the level you think your student is reading at. Then you find that passage in the placement passage. You give them a 1-minute timed reading. I know you know how to do that. So you time them for a minute, you count their errors, and you calculate their words correct per minute score, right? It's just a fluency assessment. So you find the level that you think is right, you have the student read it for a minute, and if their words correct per minute score falls in the range, then that's the right level. If it doesn't, then you're going to either give them a harder level or a lower level, depending on what they're doing. on which way they were. So if they were outside the range on the high end, then you give them a higher level. If the level you gave them initially was a little hard and they were outside the range on the low end, then you drop them down and try the next lower level. It only takes about 5 minutes per student to place each student. So I know you have more than one student, so that number can add up quickly, but placing them within the program is absolutely essential. It's going to go much more smoothly if you do our placement process the way it's intended. And again, it takes about 5 minutes per student. During the placement, the goal is set. And what I mean by the goal is the story goal within the Read Naturally Encore program, not their long-term fluency goal, but the story goal. Okay, and it's going to make a little more sense in a minute when we talk about implementing the steps. So what I'm going to do now is show you a short video of the program being used in the classroom. I don't know about you, but I'm somebody who does a little better if I have a visual image. So I'm going to show you a 5-minute video of this program being used in the classroom. After this video, we are going to walk through the steps that you see in this video as if we are struggling readers. So if you haven't already, click on the handout link in the chat box. Page 21 of that handout is what you're going to need for our interactive activity once we're done with this video. But for now, just sit back and watch the students utilizing this video, or not the video, watch the students in this video utilizing the paper-based version of Read Naturally Encore. And hopefully that will give you a nice idea of what it looks like in an actual classroom. So here we go with that.
Let's go through the steps of the Read Naturally Encore program. This is Javon. Her teacher taught her how to complete the steps in Encore. Let's watch her work through a story. As you watch, notice that Javon can now work through most of the steps independently. She begins by choosing a story to work on from the set provided by her teacher. Giving students a choice of stories helps put them in control of their own learning. After selecting a story, Javon listens to the key words and their definitions or reads along with the narrator. This step helps students learn several challenging words from the story. Based on the story title, picture, and key words, she predicts what the story will be about. Next, Javon times herself for 1 minute as she reads the story aloud, but quietly for the first time. This first timing is called the cold timing. During the cold timing, Javon underlines any word she has difficulty reading. Her teacher has told her to underline words that she stops on, stumbles on, or wants to skip. After the cold timing, Javon counts how many words she attempted. Then she subtracts her errors to calculate the number of words she read correctly. Students who are new to the program need the teacher present during the cold timing until they can accurately identify their own errors. Javon graphs her cold timing score in blue on a fluency graph. Next, she reads the entire story along with a recording several times. In this step, Javon doesn't just passively listen to the story. Instead, she actively reads out loud quietly. Reading aloud helps make sure that Javon's actually reading with the narrator, who correctly pronounces the words. Students typically read along with the narrator 3 times. A few students may need to read along more than 3 times. Older students and students reading close to grade level may only need to read along once or twice. Once Javon has completed the read-along, she practices reading the story aloud quietly, without the narrator. She will practice anywhere from 3 to 10 times.
Have you ever wondered how people get ideas?
During these practices, she reads as far as she can in 1 minute and then calculates her score as she did during the cold timing. Javon continues practicing until she reaches the individualized goal rate that her teacher set. Once Javon can read the story at the goal rate, she turns up her red card to signal that she's ready to pass and needs help from an adult. While waiting for an adult, Javon answers some questions about the story. The comprehension questions are an important way of reminding students that they're reading for meaning, not just rate. If she finishes the questions before an adult is available, Javon continues practicing the story, trying to improve her score. She knows that if she isn't working, an adult won't come over to time her.
All right, are you ready to pass?
As soon as she's available, the adult conducts a 1-minute hot timing to see if Javon can pass the story.
Whenever you start reading, I'll start the timer.
Have you ever wondered how people get ideas to make new ones on the one side and loops on the other?
If Javon reaches her goal in the hot timing, makes 3 or fewer errors, reads with proper expression, and answers all the questions correctly, she passes the story. Javon graphs her hot timing score in red on the fluency graph, giving visual proof of her progress on the story. Finally, Javon sets the timer for 5 minutes and retells or summarizes the story. This step provides an opportunity to develop summarizing skills and reminds students that they are reading for understanding. An adult checks the retelling and counts the number of words written, excluding parts that were directly copied or that didn't reflect the story. Some teachers give bonus points for proper capitalization and punctuation. Javon graphs the number of words she wrote in 5 minutes, which enables her teacher to track her progress. Knowing that the retell is being measured motivates students to remember more of what they've read.
You have totally finished Velcro. Excellent job.
Now that Javon's completed all the steps, she starts again by selecting a new story to work on. Students work at their own pace, and it's quite possible that Javon won't complete all these steps in a single session. Instead, she makes note of what step she's on at the end of a session, and on the next day, she'll start working where she left off. Refer to the teacher's manual for more details about each step and lesson plans for teaching the steps to your students.
All right, well, I hope that was a helpful video image so you can see what it looks like in an actual classroom. Now what we're going to do is my favorite part of the session is we're going to have you go through the steps just like you saw Javon doing in the video. I'm going to be the audio support. So I want you to turn to the page in your handout where you see a story that looks like this. All right, it's page 21 of the handout. Now you've already invested about 30 minutes into this session. We've got about 10 or 12, 15 more, and make the most of use of your time, right? And participate with us. What we know about struggling readers is that it is much easier to get them to go along with the program if they believe in it, right? We need their buy-in. They're going to be more effective. They're going to be harder working if they buy into the program. What we also know is that teachers need to believe in what they're doing as well. And so this activity will give you a sense of how the program works, why it works, and most importantly, that it works. And so we're going to give you the opportunity to go through a story as if you are a struggling reader so that you can see how and why and that this program, Read Naturally Encore, is very effective for students. So once you pull up page 21 from your handout, you're going to see a page that looks like this, and think about what it is you notice about this passage. If you take a look at the words in this passage, you might realize that they're missing some letters. All the letters that we're missing are vowels. Now, this is really important. All Read Naturally stories have vowels. We would never do this to a struggling reader, but we've done it to you because I know you're good readers. And I can't give you a passage and have you go through the steps and see that you get better at reading because you're already really good at reading. But you're probably not really good at reading words without vowels. And so it's probably hard, a little intimidating. If I were to ask one of you to get up in front of a group of your peers and read this out loud, my guess is most of you would hope, you put your head down and hope I didn't call on you. And think of how often we ask our struggling readers to get up to read something in front of a group of their peers, something that's hard. It's kind of amazing they keep coming back to school after having to do such a thing, right? I can't see you right now, but I suspect that you are practicing. You're trying to figure out what those words are, what they say. And just like your students, it bothers you to not know. The kids don't like it either. It does not feel good. So it gives you an insight into what that might feel like. Now, also in your handout is a graph, so you're going to have that handy. If you have it printed, great. You can going to actually write on that graph. If you don't have it printed, that's fine. You can just turn to it and kind of indicate it in your finger about where it will go. So either a printed version of these couple pages or the electronic version, either option is going to be just fine. The first step that students do when they're working in Read Naturally Encore is they pick a story. They can pick any of the stories. They're not ordered in any way. I had to pick the story for you. We're going to read Killer Bees. We're going to read it without the vowels, but typically your students can select whichever one they want. The next step is the keywords. When you time kids reading, they think you care about speed. And so the very first thing we have them do is about meaning. What we care about is understanding the story, the words. So we're going to do a keywords, a vocabulary word, right? Step out of the gate. So I want you to read along out loud with me. Now I can't hear you, but I'd ask that you do that to get the most out of this program, to get the most out of this training. So please pull up that piece of paper that has the story, and right under where it says review keywords, I'm going to be the audio support and read these words and their definitions. And I'd like you to read out loud with me as well as you can. Here we go. Gentle. Gentle means mild or not likely to cause harm. Mean. When an animal is mean, it is easily upset and does not act in a nice way. Swarm. A swarm is a big group of insects, often bees, moving together. Chase. Chase means to follow something in order to catch it. Now, the next step is a comprehension step. It's meant to get kids to think about what they're going to read before they read it. Predicting is great in helping students prepare their minds for the content they're about to get. And so I ask that you just jot down a quick prediction about what you think the story is going to be about. I like to tell kids to include at least one or two of those keywords. If you have the handout printed, go ahead and write it right on that handout. If not, just jot down a prediction, a few words, what you think the story is going to be about on any piece of paper you have on your desk. Okay. And again, we're on that page 21 of the handout that has the passage. Now we're going to do the cold timing. I'm going to time you reading. When I time kids, I say, when I hear your voices, I'll start my timer. Well, I'm not going to be able to hear your voices in this particular setting. So I will start the timer after I say that. And I need you to begin reading out loud. As soon as you hear me say, when I hear your voice, I'll start my timer. Please begin reading out loud at that point. As you're reading, I want you to have a pen or pencil in your hand. And when you come to a word you don't know, I want you to underline it. Okay. Now, if you don't have the paper printed out, so if your handout is just electronic and it's not printed out, it's just on your page, that's fine. When you come to a word you don't know, make a little check mark on a pad of paper on your desk and just keep reading. So that you're just going to keep a tally of how many times you came to a word you didn't know. And the way you know that you don't know is if you stop in front of it, if you have to skip it, or if you stumble on it. I call it the 3 S's. Stop, stumble, or skip. That means you don't know the word well enough. I need you to make a check mark or underline the word and keep reading. The key is to keep reading as best you can. Okay. So I'm going to time you as I promised I would, and I will start my timer after I say that. Please begin reading right under where it says read the story with the first word that is bees. Okay. So please begin reading that out loud as best you can. So here we go. When I hear your voices, I will start my timer. Start. All right, stop. Draw a line after the last word you think you read correctly. Bring your finger over to the left margin where there's a number written. That's how many words have been written up until that point. Then count over to your first, or to the line. So count over to the last word you attempted. Go ahead and subtract the number of words you underlined or the number of dash marks you made. Subtract the number of words you were willing to say were your errors and do the math. So take the number of words you attempted, less the number of mistakes you made, and that gives you a words correct per minute score, which you can then graph on that graph that's in your handout. I think it's page 23 of the handout. If you have it printed, go ahead and draw a line on there. If you don't have it printed, it's just on your computer. Just kind of put your finger near your screen to how far you got up. Now, typically, I've been doing this activity for a long time. Usually teachers get to somewhere around that end of that first paragraph, you know, somewhere between 60 and 85 or 90 words correct per minute. And normally when kids get to this step, they know what their story goal is because that was set during placement. I didn't give you your story goal, but you might remember at the beginning of our time together today, I said that adult proficient readers read somewhere between 150 and 200 words correct per minute when they're reading out loud. So your story goal is 150. Now, if you have a student who's close to or meeting their story goal on their cold timing, they're not in the right spot. You want the story goal to be something that's challenging, that they have to work hard to reach. So the story goal should be a little ways above what their cold timing is, so that they have to practice several times in order to reach that. Now we're going to do the read along. I am going to be the audio support, and you're going to read out loud with me as best you can. I'm only going to read the first paragraph. Okay, so we're only going to do the read along for that first paragraph because I want to demonstrate something for you. But it's important that you know that your students will read the entire passage with the audio support. Okay, we're just going to do the first paragraph. As you're reading, I want you to notice how many words there were that you thought you knew that you didn't, and that your attention is naturally drawn to them. All right. And I want you to realize how glad you are to have me and how good it feels to have somebody who knows what the words say that is reading with you. And notice that I go slowly and how it's important that I go slowly so that you can actively read along out loud with me. All right, so here we go. Beginning right where you did with the cold timing. Read out loud with me as best you can. Bees are very important. They make honey and help crops to grow. There are many kinds of bees. One kind is gentle, but it does not work hard. Another kind of bee is very mean, but it is a hard worker. This bee makes much more honey than the gentle bee. One man thought that mating these two bees would be a good idea. He thought crossing the two kinds of bees would make a gentle, hard-working bee. That was a big mistake. So there's words in there that you thought you knew, but you didn't, and you notice them, right? Because you said it out loud, you hear it out loud, you notice, hey, that wasn't right. So your attention's drawn to them. I'm going to practice this with you one more time. I want you to read along with me again, and this time notice that I go a little bit faster. So do the audio CDs. Each recording gets a little bit faster. I want you to read along with me out loud again as best as you can, and this time I want you to try to add expression. Try to mimic the expression I do, just like your students should when they do this step. So here we go. Bees are very important. They make honey and help crops to grow. There are many kinds of bees. One kind is gentle, but it does not work hard. Another kind of bee is very mean, but it is a hard worker. This bee makes much more honey than the gentle bee. One man thought that mating these two bees would be a good idea. He thought crossing the two kinds of bees would make a gentle, hard-working bee. That was a big mistake. All right, we're going to do the practice. Now, normally your kids will practice 3, 4, 5, 6 times. We're just going to practice once, and then we're going to be done. We're not going to do the rest of the steps. But I just want you to see if you got better. Okay, so this is the last step we're going to do together today. When you're practicing, I'm going to time you the same way I did before, where I say, when I hear your voice, I'll start my timer. So please begin reading out loud after I say that. But this time, what I want you to notice is what happens to you when you get to the second paragraph that we didn't practice together. Okay, so take note of that. So here we go. We're going to have you read that first, read for 1 minute again, as much as you can get through in a minute, and I'm going to start my timer. So here we go. When I hear your voices, I will start my timer. Begin. All right, stop. All right, did you get better? You did? You got further? Did you get to 150, our story goal? No, probably not. Very rarely does that happen. If your students meet their story goal on their first practice, story goal is not right. They need to practice several times to meet that story goal. Okay. But what happened to you when you got to that second paragraph that we didn't do together? You probably slowed down. You maybe lost your confidence. So you can see how important the teacher modeling is, how important it is to read along out loud with the audio support. So you slowed down, it was harder, but when you got to that second paragraph, was it easier or harder than the very first time you read the first words on this page? It's easier. Even though you hadn't read that second paragraph yet, when you got there, it was easier because it transfers to new text. The words you learned in the first paragraph appeared, some of them, in the second paragraph, and you were able to read them. So it transfers to new text. Okay, so you can see how important teacher modeling is, how the word will transfer to new text, so your students will become better readers on the first time they read a new passage the following day, right? So typically your students will practice several times until they meet their goal. They'll answer their quiz question. They'll listen. You'll listen to them read to make sure they can meet all the criteria. They'll do all their graphing and their word lists. And then they'll be done with the story and they can pick a new one. Monitoring student performance is done with your graphs. We have a webinar that's on Read Encore placement. So if you want to focus in on just learning about how to do placement in Encore, look at our website. We do have a webinar on that. And we also have webinars on monitoring student progress in Read Naturally Encore. So look at that for those recordings as well. Our website also includes fidelity checklists for Read Naturally Encore, and that can be really helpful in helping you plan and set up and making sure you're implementing it with fidelity. So thank you all so much for your time today, for your dedication to struggling readers. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.